My brother screamed I was losing it. Mom dialed 911, told them I was dangerous. Then the sirens started after I revealed at Grandma's funeral that she'd left everything to me because they'd been drugging her and trying to change the will. The funeral home's main viewing room went silent, except for Marcus's ragged breathing and my mother Patricia's trembling hands clutching her phone. Every face in that mahogany-paneled room turned toward me like I'd just confessed to murder, not exposed it. My mother's pearl necklace caught the light from the stained glass windows as she pressed the phone to her ear, her voice syrupy with false concern. Yes, my daughter is having a mental breakdown at her grandmother's funeral. Please send someone immediately. Marcus lunged toward me, his expensive suit jacket flaring, but I simply stepped aside and let him stumble into the display of white lilies. The water from the vase spread across the carpet in a dark stain that somehow felt prophetic. The mourners gasped and whispered, their black-clad forms pressing back against the walls lined with sympathy cards. My mother's face was a mask of theatrical grief, but I caught the flash of panic in her eyes when I pulled the accordion folder from my purse and held it up. Before the police arrive for this dangerous woman, I said, my voice carrying across the room with perfect clarity. Maybe everyone should know why Grandma Dorothy really called me to her bedside 3 months ago. Marcus recovered his footing, his face purple with rage, but something in my expression made him freeze. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I was smiling. That's what terrified them. I'd been Grandma Dorothy's favorite since childhood, the one who actually visited every week instead of just calling when they needed money. For 34 years, I'd sat at her kitchen table learning her recipes, listening to her stories, bringing my problems to her wisdom. She'd raised me more than my own mother had, especially after Dad died when I was 12. Patricia had been too busy with her real estate career, and Marcus had been too busy being the golden child, the investment banker with the corner office, and the wife who looked good in Christmas photos. I'd become a high school history teacher, which my family treated like a personal failure. But Grandma Dorothy understood that some people measure wealth differently. She'd told me once, while we planted tomatoes in her garden, that she'd hidden something valuable in plain sight, something that would protect the people who truly loved her. At the time, I thought she meant her recipe box. I was wrong. The sirens grew louder outside. Through the funeral home windows, I could see the flash of red and blue lights painting the autumn afternoon. My mother's performance intensified, her voice rising. She's always been unstable, ever since her father died. We've tried to get her help, but she refuses. Marcus crossed his arms, his Harvard ring glinting, playing the concerned brother perfectly. But I noticed how he positioned himself between me and the exit, how his wife Vanessa quietly ushered their 2 children out a side door. They knew something was about to detonate. The other mourners, Grandma's church friends and neighbors, looked confused and uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to Dorothy's memory and the spectacle of her family imploding over her casket. I let them sweat for exactly 30 seconds while the police cars pulled into the parking lot. Then I opened the folder and pulled out the first document, holding it high enough for the front rows to see the official medical laboratory letterhead. Grandma Dorothy started feeling sick last November, I announced. Dizzy spells, confusion, tremors. Her doctor couldn't figure it out. But Grandma was sharper than anyone gave her credit for. She asked me to take her to a private lab, not the one her regular doctor used. She wanted specific tests run. I paused, watching my mother's face drain of color beneath her carefully applied makeup. They found toxic levels of diphenhydramine and lorazepam in her blood, sleeping medications, in doses that would make anyone appear senile. The funeral director appeared at the back of the room, wringing his hands anxiously as 2 police officers entered behind him. But now the mourners weren't just watching me anymore. They were looking at Marcus and Patricia with dawning horror. My mother's voice cracked. This is absurd. Mother took those medications for her insomnia. Rebecca is twisting everything. But I was already pulling out the second document, pharmacy records that I'd obtained through Grandma's medical power of attorney, which she'd given me and only me last year. Funny thing, I continued, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Grandma Dorothy never had a prescription for these medications. But Marcus's wife Vanessa sure did, and the pickup dates match perfectly with every visit they made to Grandma's house over the past 8 months. Marcus exploded. You fucking psycho, you're making this up. He moved toward me again. But one of the officers stepped between us, hand on his belt. The older cop, a gray-haired man with weathered features, held up a hand. Everyone needs to calm down. Ma'am? He looked at me. These are serious accusations. I nodded calmly. Officer, I have documentation. But more importantly, Grandma Dorothy had documentation. That's why my brother and mother are so desperate to paint me as crazy, because 3 days before she died, Grandma Dorothy went to her attorney and changed her will. She left her house, her savings, everything to me. Not because I asked for it, but because she wanted to protect her assets from the people who were slowly poisoning her to make her incompetent enough to sign a new will. The room erupted. Patricia's carefully constructed composure shattered completely as she shrieked about ingratitude and lies, but her words were drowned out by the shocked voices of Grandma's friends. I heard someone say, "Dorothy told me she was scared of them. I thought she was just confused." Another voice, "I saw Marcus going through her medicine cabinet last month. Said he was helping organize her pills. The officers were trying to restore order, asking everyone to step outside. But I wasn't finished. I pulled out the final document, the one that would end this forever." Grandma Dorothy also recorded a video testimony officer. 4 hours of lucid, detailed explanation of everything she noticed, every time she felt drugged, every conversation she overheard about how much her house was worth, and how they'd split the money. She gave me the flash drive the week before she died and made me promise to play it only when I absolutely had to. I held up the small USB drive, and I watched my mother's legs nearly buckle. Because she knew. They both knew. That video would destroy them. Not just financially, but publicly, legally, permanently. Dorothy Whitmore had been beloved in this community for 40 years, and when people heard her voice from beyond the grave explaining how her own son and daughter-in-law had drugged her, how her daughter had encouraged it, how they'd pressured her to sign documents while she was barely conscious, there would be no recovering from that. The police officer reached for the drive. "We'll need to review this as evidence." I handed it over without hesitation. "I have copies. My attorney has copies. Grandma's attorney has copies, and if anything happens to me, they'll be released to every news outlet in the state." Marcus made a strangled sound, somewhere between rage and desperation. Vanessa had reappeared in the doorway, her face ashen, probably realizing her pharmacy records were about to become part of a criminal investigation. Patricia grabbed the younger officer's arm. "My daughter is mentally ill. She's fabricated all of this. You can't possibly." But the officer was already reading the medical lab report I'd handed him, his expression hardening with each line. The funeral director disappeared, probably calling his lawyer, worried about liability for hosting this disaster. Grandma's casket sat serene and undisturbed at the front of the room, blanketed in white roses I'd chosen. She would have loved this, I thought. She'd always said the truth was like a weed. It would crack through concrete if you gave it time. The older officer looked at Marcus and Patricia. "We're going to need you both to come down to the station to answer some questions." My mother's shriek could have shattered crystal. "This is harassment! We've done nothing wrong!" But her hands were shaking so badly she dropped her phone, and when she bent to pick it up, I saw tears streaming down her face. Real ones this time. Not the performed grief she'd displayed at the visitation. Marcus's face had gone from purple to gray, his banker's composure completely destroyed. He looked at me with pure hatred and hissed, "You'll regret this." I stepped closer to him, close enough that only he could hear my next words. "No, Marcus. You'll regret that you underestimated the woman who taught me everything I know." Grandma Dorothy played the confused old lady perfectly while she gathered every piece of evidence she needed. She was always 3 steps ahead of you. I learned from the best. The officers escorted Marcus and Patricia out through a side entrance to avoid the crowd of mourners now clustering in the parking lot. Phones out, already spreading the story through text messages and social media. In a town this size, they'd be notorious by sunset. Vanessa followed silently, her designer heels clicking on the tile floor like a countdown. I turned back to the room full of shocked faces and said quietly, "I'm sorry you all had to witness this." But Grandma Dorothy deserved the truth to come out. She deserved justice, and I promised her I'd make sure she got it. Mrs. Chen, Grandma's neighbor for 20 years, stepped forward and took my hand. "Dorothy told me last month that you were her real family." I understand now what she meant. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and disinfectant. I sat in an interview room with Detective Laura Brennan, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s who'd been taking notes for the past hour. The USB drive sat on the table between us like a loaded gun. She'd watched the entire video, all 4 hours, while I waited in the lobby drinking terrible vending machine tea. When she finally called me back in, her expression was grim. "Your grandmother was remarkable," Detective Brennan said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "The level of detail in her testimony is extraordinary. Dates, times, specific conversations. She even managed to record audio on 2 occasions when your brother and his wife were in her kitchen discussing her assets. She paused, studying my face. You knew about all of this before today? I nodded. Grandma Dorothy gave me the drive 3 weeks before she died. She made me promise not to watch it until after the funeral. She said people needed to see Marcus and Mom perform their grief first. Let them think they'd gotten away with it. She wanted them comfortable before the trap closed. My throat tightened, remembering that last conversation. How frail she'd looked, but how fierce her eyes had been. She told me she was tired of fighting, that the drugs had done permanent damage, but she wanted to make sure they couldn't do this to anyone else's grandmother. Detective Brennan's jaw tightened. The medical examiner who handled your grandmother's body noted some irregularities, but the death certificate listed natural causes. She was 86, had a documented history of heart problems. Nobody questioned it. She leaned forward. But with this new evidence, we'll be requesting an autopsy review. The timeline in her video testimony suggests the drugging intensified in her final month. If we can prove the medications contributed to her death, we're looking at potential manslaughter charges, possibly even murder. The word hung in the air like smoke. Murder. My mother and brother hadn't just tried to steal from Grandma Dorothy. They might have actually killed her. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where grief had been. What happens now? I asked. We've separated your mother and brother for questioning. Vanessa Fletcher lawyered up immediately, which is smart on her part since those pharmacy records put her directly in the chain of evidence. Your mother is currently trying to claim she had no idea Marcus was drugging Dorothy, that she's as much a victim as anyone. Detective Brennan's expression made clear what she thought of that defense. Your brother is insisting this is all a misunderstanding, that he was trying to help his mother manage her medications because you weren't around enough to care for her properly. I laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. I was there every Tuesday and Saturday for the past 10 years. I have a calendar full of dates, photos on my phone of us together. Marcus visited maybe once a month, and only after Grandma's portfolio started looking attractive enough to fight over. Detective Brennan pulled out another folder. We'll need all of that documentation. Phone records, photos, anything that establishes your pattern of care versus theirs. We're also going to interview everyone who was at that funeral home. Several people have already called the station offering statements about things Dorothy said to them, concerns she expressed. She paused. One woman, Margaret Howell, said your grandmother told her 6 months ago that she'd caught Marcus photographing documents in her home office. Dorothy played it off as confusion at the time, but Margaret said she seemed frightened. My hands clenched into fists on the table. 6 months ago. They'd been planning this for at least half a year, systematically drugging an elderly woman to make her pliable enough to change her will. The calculation of it, the cruelty, made me want to scream. Instead, I asked, what about the will they were trying to get her to sign? Do you have that? Dorothy's attorney, Robert Ashford, brought it to us an hour ago. He'd been holding on to it because your grandmother instructed him to. Another piece of her evidence collection. The document your brother drafted would have split Dorothy's estate between him and your mother, with you receiving a token $5,000 and some personal items. Detective Brennan's voice carried an edge of disgust. The house alone is worth $450,000. Her investment accounts total another $300,000. They were trying to steal $750,000 from a woman they were actively poisoning. $750,000. I'd known Grandma Dorothy had money. She'd lived frugally and invested wisely after Grandpa died 20 years ago, but I hadn't realized the full extent. No wonder Marcus had gotten desperate. His investment firm had taken hits during the last market correction. I'd heard through family gossip that he'd made some risky bets that hadn't paid off, and my mother had always lived beyond her means, keeping up appearances in her real estate circles with designer clothes and luxury cars while maxing out credit cards. There's something else, Detective Brennan said, sliding a document across the table. Your grandmother's attorney included a letter she wrote to be opened only if you produced the video evidence. Want to read it now or wait? My hands trembled as I picked up the envelope, cream-colored stationery with Dorothy's elegant cursive spelling my name. I opened it carefully, aware that this was the last communication I'd ever received from the woman who'd been more mother to me than my own. The letter was 2 pages, and as I read, tears blurred the words. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then my plan worked, and you've stood up to Marcus and Patricia the way I knew you would. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I know this has been impossibly hard, exposing your own family, but you need to understand something. They stopped being family when they decided my life was worth less than my bank account. I want you to know that I'm not angry about what they did to me. I'm old, I've lived a good life, And honestly, the drugs just made me sleep more. What makes me furious is that they tried to take away your inheritance, the security I wanted you to have. You've spent your whole life helping others, teaching children, living modestly, and you deserve to be rewarded for being good and kind. They wanted to steal that from you out of pure greed. Use the money wisely, my darling girl. Buy a house with a garden like mine. Travel to all those places we talked about. Maybe finally write that historical fiction novel you've been plotting since graduate school. Live the life I always knew you could have, the one you sacrificed because you were too busy taking care of everyone else. And Rebecca, don't feel guilty about what happens to Marcus and Patricia. They made their choices. They knew what they were doing was wrong, and they did it anyway. Some people can't be saved from themselves. You tried your whole life to be the good daughter, the good sister. Now it's time to be good to yourself. All my love, forever and always, Grandma Dorothy. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope, not trusting my voice. Detective Brennan waited quietly, then said, "Take your time. We'll need you to come back tomorrow to give a formal statement, but you're free to go for now. Is there somewhere safe you can stay tonight? This is going to be all over the local news, and you might want to avoid the attention." I thought about my small apartment across town, the one-bedroom place that was all I could afford on a teacher's salary. "I'll be fine," I said, but even I could hear the exhaustion in my voice. The adrenaline from the funeral was wearing off, leaving me hollowed out and shaking. "Actually," Detective Brennan said, "there's someone in the lobby who's been waiting to see you. Says she's a colleague from your school." I stepped out into the fluorescent-lit waiting area and found Jasmine Torres, who taught English in the classroom next to mine. She stood up immediately, her dark eyes full of concern. "Rebecca, I saw the news alerts. Everyone's talking about it. Are you okay?" She crossed the space between us and pulled me into a tight hug before I could answer. "How did you know I was here?" I asked, my voice muffled against her shoulder. "Your principal called me. Said if anyone was going to track you down and make sure you weren't handling this alone, it would be me." Jasmine pulled back, studying my face. "You're coming to stay at my place tonight. No arguments. My husband's already making up the guest room, and I stopped by your apartment to grab some clothes." She held up my overnight bag like evidence. "I know you, Rebecca. You'd go home, sit in the dark, and pretend you're fine while you fall apart. Not happening." Something in me cracked at her kindness. The simple fact that someone had thought about what I'd need. They might have killed her, Jasmine, not just stolen from her, actually killed her. "I know," she said quietly, "and they're going to pay for it. But right now, you need to eat something and sleep somewhere safe. Tomorrow, you can be strong again. Tonight, let someone take care of you for once." I let her guide me out to her car, away from the police station and the reporters who were starting to gather outside with cameras and microphones. As we drove through the darkening streets, my phone buzzed constantly with messages. Blocked numbers, reporters probably, but also texts from other teachers, from former students who'd seen the news, from Grandma's neighbors. Words of support, offers of help, expressions of outrage on Dorothy's behalf. One message made me pause. It was from Marcus's wife, Vanessa. "You've destroyed everything. I hope you're satisfied. Our children will grow up knowing their aunt is a vindictive bitch who sent their father to prison over lies." I showed it to Jasmine at a red light. She read it and snorted. "Save that. Forward it to the detective. Witness intimidation looks really bad in court." Then, more gently, "Do you feel vindictive?" I thought about it, really examined my feelings beneath the exhaustion and grief. "No," I said finally. "I feel like I kept a promise. Grandma Dorothy asked me to tell the truth, and I did. What happens to Marcus and Mom now is just consequences. They earned every bit of what's coming." Jasmine nodded approvingly. "Good. Don't let them rewrite this story. They're the villains here, not you." She pulled into her driveway, a neat craftsman-style house with a porch swing. "Come on. Carlos made his famous enchiladas and there's wine. Tomorrow you can deal with lawyers and statements and whatever else. Tonight you just need to survive." As I followed her inside, where warmth and the smell of home cooking and the sound of her husband's welcome wrapped around me, I felt something shift. I'd spent so long trying to hold my broken family together, trying to be good enough that maybe Marcus would respect me, or Mom would show up for once. But Grandma Dorothy had shown me a different truth. Real family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when everything falls apart. And right now, with my grandmother's letter in my purse and her courage in my bones, I knew I'd keep showing up for her memory until justice was done, no matter how long it took or what it cost. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. Jasmine knocked softly on the guest room door and entered with coffee that smelled like salvation. "Your phone's been buzzing like a hornet's nest since 6 a.m., she said, setting the mug on the nightstand. "I may have turned it off around 5 so you could sleep." "You're welcome." I grabbed the phone with one hand and the coffee with the other, scrolling through the chaos. 3 calls from Detective Brennan, 5 from Robert Ashford, Grandma's attorney, 2 from numbers I didn't recognize but suspected were reporters, and 1 from my mother's sister, Aunt Diane, who lived in Florida and rarely involved herself in family drama. I called Diane first, bracing myself. She answered on the second ring. "Rebecca, thank God, I've been trying to reach you since midnight." Her voice was strained, tight with something I couldn't identify. "Is it true? Did Marcus really drug your grandmother?" "Yes," I said simply. "There's video testimony, medical evidence, pharmacy records, all of it." A long silence then. "I believe you." "Patricia called me last night, hysterical, begging me to wire her money for a lawyer. Said you'd manufactured evidence out of jealousy over Dorothy's will." Diane's voice hardened. "I told her I wouldn't send a dime until I talked to you. Patricia's been lying to me for years, Rebecca. About money she borrowed and never paid back. About why she couldn't visit Mom before she died. About everything. I'm done being her safety net." Relief flooded through me. I'd half expected the extended family to close ranks, to decide I was the problem because acknowledging the truth was too ugly. "Thank you for believing me," I said quietly. "Dorothy sent me a letter 2 months ago." Diane continued. "I didn't understand it at the time. She wrote that if anything happened to her, I should trust you completely and question everything Patricia told me. She said you were the only one who'd stayed true." A pause. "I should have visited more. I should have seen what was happening." "She didn't want you to see," I said. "She was protecting everyone from the ugliness until she could expose it on her own terms. Grandma Dorothy was strategic to the end." After we hung up, I called Detective Brennan. She answered with the efficiency of someone who'd been awake for hours. "Miss Whitmore, good timing. We need you at the station by 10 for your formal statement, but there's been a development." Her tone made my stomach clench. "Your brother posted bail 2 hours ago, $25,000, which he apparently scraped together through his wife's family. He's claiming police harassment and has retained Gerald Blackwood as his attorney." Gerald Blackwood, even I knew that name. He was the most expensive criminal defense attorney in the region, the one wealthy people called when they needed someone ruthless. "How can Marcus afford him?" "He can't," Detective Brennan said bluntly. "We're investigating whether the retainer payment came from your grandmother's estate. If your brother accessed those accounts before probate, that's another crime to add to the pile. Robert Ashford is filing for emergency injunctions as we speak." She paused. "Be careful, Rebecca. Desperate people do stupid things, and your brother just became very desperate." I arrived at the station 90 minutes later, dressed in the most professional outfit Jasmine had grabbed from my apartment. Gray slacks and a burgundy blazer that Grandma Dorothy had bought me for parent-teacher conferences. Robert Ashford met me in the lobby, a silver-haired man in his 60s with the precise manner of someone who'd spent decades protecting his clients' interests. "Rebecca," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "before we go in, you need to understand the situation. Your grandmother's estate is substantial, and your brother is going to fight this will with everything he has. Gerald Blackwood is already filing challenges, claiming Dorothy lacked mental capacity when she made the changes. But we have proof she was being drugged," I protested. "Exactly," Ashford said, "which is why their strategy is going to be claiming she was paranoid and delusional, that the drugging accusations are fabrications of a confused elderly mind, and that you manipulated her into changing the will during a period of diminished capacity." His eyes met mine steadily. "They're going to try to paint you as the villain here, Rebecca. A scheming granddaughter who isolated Dorothy from her real family and poisoned her mind against them. The audacity of it stole my breath. They'd literally poisoned her. And now they were going to claim she'd been mentally poisoned against them? That's insane. That's litigation," Ashford corrected. "The truth doesn't always win in court. What wins is the best story backed by the most compelling evidence. That's why Dorothy was so meticulous in her documentation. She knew this would get ugly." He pulled out a tablet and showed me a document. "This is a motion Blackwood filed this morning requesting immediate access to your grandmother's medical records, pharmacy records, and personal correspondence. He's trying to find anything that could suggest incompetence or undue influence. Will he find it? I asked. Ashford smiled thinly. He'll find a woman who planned her defense better than most attorneys I know. Dorothy kept meticulous records of every conversation, every visit, every incident. She documented Marcus's financial troubles, Patricia's spending habits, even Vanessa's history of prescription drug issues that made her vulnerable to being coerced into supplying medications. He tapped the screen. Your grandmother essentially built the entire case file for us. All we have to do is present it. The formal statement took 3 hours. Detective Brennan walked me through every detail. When I first noticed Grandma Dorothy seemed different. What she'd said when she gave me the USB drive. What I knew about Marcus and Patricia's financial situations. A stenographer recorded everything while 2 other investigators asked follow-up questions. By the time we finished, my throat was raw and my head pounded. We're executing search warrants on Marcus and Vanessa's home today, Detective Brennan told me as we wrapped up. Looking for any remaining medications, financial documents, anything that connects to the drugging. We're also pulling their phone records to see if there are text messages or calls that discuss Dorothy's estate or her condition. She leaned back in her chair. Your brother made a mistake confronting you at the funeral. If he'd stayed quiet, played the grieving son, this would have been much harder to prove. But he panicked, and panic makes people sloppy. I thought about Marcus's purple face, his fury when I'd held up that folder. He thought he'd gotten away with it. Grandma Dorothy dying was supposed to be the end, not the beginning. The best criminals are patient, Brennan said. Your brother is not a good criminal. He's a spoiled man who couldn't wait for his inheritance and didn't think an 86-year-old woman could outsmart him. She smiled grimly. Underestimating Dorothy Whitmore was his biggest mistake. I left the station through a back entrance to avoid the reporters camping out front. Jasmine had taken a personal day to drive me around, claiming she needed the break from grading essays anyway. As we pulled out of the parking lot, my phone rang. An unknown number, but something made me answer. Rebecca Whitmore? A woman's voice, professional but warm. This is Amanda Chen from Channel 7 News. I'm covering your grandmother's case, and I'd like to give you an opportunity to tell your side of the story before your brother's legal team controls the narrative. No comment, I said automatically. I understand, Amanda continued quickly, but you should know that Gerald Blackwood just gave a press conference on the courthouse steps. He's claiming you're a troubled woman with a history of mental health issues who manipulated an elderly woman suffering from dementia. He says Marcus Fletcher is the real victim here. A devoted son whose mother was alienated from him by a jealous, unstable daughter. My vision went red around the edges. That's a lie. All of it. I know, Amanda said, which is why I want to help you fight back. I've been investigating elder abuse cases for 5 years, Rebecca. What your grandmother did, documenting everything, leaving video testimony, that's extraordinary. Her story could help other families recognize the signs, could lead to better protections for vulnerable seniors. But if you stay silent, Blackwood's version becomes the truth. Jasmine was shaking her head emphatically, mouthing, "Don't do it." But I felt something hot and fierce rising in my chest. Marcus thought he could lie his way out of this, turn himself into the victim while Grandma Dorothy's body wasn't even cold yet. If I do this, I said slowly, I want guarantees. Nothing I say gets edited to make me look unstable or vindictive. You air the full context, including the fact that my grandmother was drugged to make her incompetent enough to change her will. And you mentioned that there's video testimony nobody can dispute. You have my word, Amanda said. And Rebecca, I already pulled your employment records. Talked to your principal. He had nothing but praise for you. Said you're the kind of teacher who stays late to tutor struggling students and uses your own money to buy classroom supplies. That's not the profile of someone mentally unstable or capable of manipulation. We arranged to meet the next day at Jasmine's house, neutral territory where I'd feel safe. After I hung up, Jasmine pulled over into a parking lot and turned to face me. Are you sure about this? Going public could backfire. It could make you a target. I'm already a target, I said. Marcus is going to destroy my reputation any way he can because that's his only defense. If people believe I'm crazy or manipulative, then they'll doubt everything, even video evidence. But if I tell the truth first, if I show them who Grandma Dorothy really was and what she went through, then Marcus's lies won't stick. Jasmine studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but we do this smart. You're not going on camera looking exhausted and emotional. Tomorrow morning, you're getting a full night's sleep, a decent breakfast, and we're making you look calm and credible. This interview needs to show them a rational, thoughtful woman who kept a promise to someone she loved. That evening, while Jasmine's husband Carlos cooked dinner, I sat at their kitchen table and drafted talking points with Robert Ashford on speakerphone. He was initially against the interview, worried I'd say something that could be used against me in the civil case, but eventually conceded that controlling the narrative was crucial. "Stick to facts," he instructed. "Dorothy's video testimony speaks for itself. You're simply honoring her wishes by ensuring the truth comes out. Don't speculate about Marcus's motives or finances. That's for the courts to determine. And absolutely do not express any satisfaction about his arrest. You're a grieving granddaughter seeking justice, not revenge." But as I hung up and looked at my notes, I realized that distinction was complicated. Was it revenge to want Marcus to suffer the way Grandma Dorothy had suffered? Was it justice to hope he lost everything, the way he'd tried to steal everything from her? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that Grandma Dorothy had trusted me to finish what she started, and I wouldn't stop until her killers faced full consequences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You're making a huge mistake. Drop this now and we can all move forward. Keep pushing and you'll destroy what's left of this family. M. Marcus." Threatening me even after posting bail, even with a court order to stay away. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Detective Brennan with a single line. "He's not stopping." Her response came within minutes. "Neither are we. Stay safe, Rebecca. We're building an airtight case." I looked around Jasmine's warm kitchen, at the photos of her family on the walls, at Carlos humming while he chopped vegetables, at the life they'd built together based on love and trust, instead of money and obligation. This was what Grandma Dorothy had wanted for me. Not just financial security, but freedom from the toxic people who'd spent years making me feel like I owed them something just for being family. Tomorrow I'd tell the world who Dorothy Whitmore really was, a brilliant woman who'd protected herself and the granddaughter she loved from the people who should have protected her. And if that destroyed Marcus and Patricia in the process, well, they'd struck the first blow when they'd slipped those pills into an old woman's tea. Now they'd learn what happened when you underestimated a teacher who'd learned strategy from the smartest woman she'd ever known. The interview aired on a Wednesday evening, prime time. Amanda Chen had done exactly what she promised, presenting me as calm and credible while the footage of Grandma Dorothy's testimony played in segments. The old woman on screen was sharp-eyed and articulate, methodically explaining dates and incidents, showing prescription bottles with Vanessa's name, displaying the fraudulent will Marcus had drafted. "He'd come over on Thursdays," Grandma Dorothy said on the recording, her voice steady despite the camera's slight shake. "Always on Thursdays when Rebecca had her evening classes and couldn't visit. He'd make me tea. Special tea, he called it, said it would help me sleep better. Within 20 minutes, I'd be so drowsy I could barely keep my eyes open. That's when he'd pull out papers, talk about how expensive my house was to maintain, how I needed to think about simplifying my finances." The camera showed her holding up a small notebook. I started writing everything down once I realized what was happening. Dates, times, symptoms. I'd hide the notebook in my sewing basket because Marcus never touched my craft supplies. Thought they were beneath him. A ghost of a smile crossed her wrinkled face. He always underestimated women's work. That was his weakness. Watching it in Jasmine's living room, surrounded by friends who'd come to support me, I felt tears streaming down my face. Grandma Dorothy's courage, her clear-minded determination to protect herself and me was overwhelming. On screen, Amanda Chen's voice narrated over family photos. Dorothy Whitmore wasn't just collecting evidence against her son. She was teaching her granddaughter Rebecca a final lesson about standing up to those who abuse power. Then my portion of the interview played. I'd followed Robert Ashford's instructions perfectly, sticking to facts, expressing grief rather than anger. "My grandmother was the strongest person I've ever known," I said, looking directly into the camera. "She taught me that love isn't about blood relations. It's about showing up, listening, caring. And she showed me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it's devastating." The broadcast ended with Amanda's closing statement. Marcus Fletcher and his mother, Patricia Whitmore, face multiple charges, including elder abuse, fraud, and possible manslaughter. Fletcher's attorney, Gerald Blackwood, declined to comment for this story, but has previously claimed the accusations are fabrications by an unstable family member. However, video testimony and medical evidence paint a different picture. An elderly woman betrayed by those who should have protected her, and a granddaughter brave enough to honor her final wishes. My phone exploded. Text messages from former students, colleagues, people I hadn't spoken to in years. The overwhelming majority were supportive, sharing their own stories of elder abuse, thanking me for speaking out. But there were others, vitriolic messages calling me a traitor, claiming I'd destroyed my family for money, accusing me of elder abuse myself. One message made my blood run cold. It was from a blocked number, but I knew Marcus's phrasing. You just signed your own death warrant. Every dirty secret, every mistake you've ever made, I'm going to expose all of it. By the time I'm done, you won't be able to show your face in this town. Carlos, Jasmine's husband, saw my expression. What is it? I showed him the phone. His jaw tightened. Forward that to the detective. Now. That's a direct threat. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Detective Brennan, her voice tight with urgency. Rebecca, I need you to stay where you are and lock the doors. Marcus violated his bail conditions by contacting you, and we have a warrant out for his arrest. He's not at home, and we can't locate him. Fear lanced through me. You think he'd actually hurt me? I think a man facing 20 years in prison might do something desperate. Brennan said bluntly. We're sending a patrol car to your location now. Do not leave the house, do not answer the door for anyone you don't know, and keep your phone on you at all times. The next 2 hours crawled by in agonizing slow motion. A police cruiser parked outside Jasmine's house. Carlos checked all the locks twice, closed all the curtains. My phone continued buzzing with messages, but I ignored everything except updates from Detective Brennan. Finally, at 9:43 p.m., she called again. We have him. Officers found Marcus at his golf club, 3 whiskeys deep and ranting about how you'd stolen his inheritance. He's back in custody, and this time there's no bail. The judge is furious about the contact violation. I sagged against Jasmine's couch, relief making me dizzy. What happens now? Now we finish building the case, Brennan said. But Rebecca, there's something you need to know. We executed those search warrants on Marcus and Vanessa's house. We found more than we expected. A pause. There's evidence they'd been planning this for over a year. Emails between Marcus and Vanessa discussing how to handle the Dorothy situation, internet search histories about medication interactions and symptoms of dementia, even a draft email to Dorothy's doctor claiming she was showing signs of incompetence. My stomach churned. How is that possible? How do you plan to murder someone for a year and still go through with it? Greed, Brennan said simply. And desperation. We also found evidence that Marcus embezzled money from his investment firm. He's been covering it up with creative accounting, but he needed a large cash infusion soon or the whole thing would collapse. Your grandmother's estate wasn't just desirable, it was necessary for him. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet living room processing everything. Marcus hadn't just been greedy, he'd been cornered, which made him exponentially more dangerous. And now he knew his entire scheme was collapsing, that he'd lost everything. The house, the money, his freedom, his reputation. All of it gone because Grandma Dorothy had been smarter than he'd ever imagined. The next morning, Robert Ashford called with unexpected news. Gerald Blackwood contacted me late last night. Marcus wants to make a deal. What kind of deal? I asked warily. He'll plead guilty to elder abuse and fraud charges if the state drops the manslaughter investigation. In exchange, he'll relinquish all claims to Dorothy's estate and agree never to contact you again. Ashford's tone made clear what he thought of this offer. He's trying to avoid a murder charge, Rebecca. If the medical examiner determines that the cumulative effect of the drugging contributed to Dorothy's death, Marcus could spend the rest of his life in prison. What do you think I should do? I asked. That's not my decision, Ashford said carefully. But I can tell you what Dorothy would probably say. She documented everything specifically so that the full truth would come out. Taking this deal would mean letting Marcus off easier than he deserves. He paused. However, trials are unpredictable. A good defense attorney might create reasonable doubt about the connection between the drugging and Dorothy's death. A plea deal guarantees at least some prison time and ensures you get the inheritance Dorothy intended. I thought about Grandma Dorothy's letter, her instruction not to feel guilty about the consequences. She'd wanted justice, not revenge. But wasn't justice making sure Marcus faced the full weight of what he'd done? I need time to think about it, I said finally. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since the funeral. I visited Grandma Dorothy's house. The executor had given me keys since I was the sole heir, but I hadn't been able to face going inside until now. The small ranch-style home sat on a quiet street, flower beds still blooming with the perennials she'd planted, front porch holding the rocking chair where she'd spent summer evenings. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it. Her reading glasses on the side table, a half-finished crossword puzzle, photos of me at various ages covering the refrigerator. I walked through the rooms slowly, remembering conversations we'd had in each space. The kitchen where she'd taught me to make her famous apple pie. The living room where we'd watched old movies on rainy Saturdays. The garden room where she'd kept her sewing supplies and, apparently, her secret evidence notebook. I found it still hidden in the sewing basket. a small spiral-bound book filled with her neat handwriting. Reading through it was like watching her build her case in real time, each entry more detailed than the last. But it was the final entry that made me sink into her chair, tears blurring the words. October 15th. Rebecca visited today. Brought me soup because I said I wasn't feeling well. She didn't know I was sick because of the pills Marcus hid in my vitamins, the ones I only discovered yesterday when I reorganized my medicine cabinet. She sat with me for 3 hours, just talking, keeping me company. This is what love looks like. Not Marcus's phone calls asking about my financial advisor. Not Patricia's occasional visits where she photographs my jewelry collection. Just someone showing up because they care. I'm running out of time. The pills are doing permanent damage. I can feel it. But I have enough evidence now. Enough to protect Rebecca and make sure Marcus can't do this to anyone else. Tomorrow, I'll go to Robert's office and finalize everything. Then I'll tell Rebecca where to find the USB drive in the notebook. She'll think I'm being paranoid, but she'll understand eventually. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving Rebecca alone with these vultures. But I've given her the weapons she needs to fight back. Now it's up to her to use them. I love you, sweetheart. Finish what I started. I closed the notebook carefully, holding it against my chest. Grandma Dorothy hadn't just documented abuse, she'd documented love. Every entry showed the contrast between Marcus's calculated cruelty and my authentic care. She'd been building a case not just against her son, but for her granddaughter. My phone rang. Detective Brennan again. Rebecca, the medical examiner, finished the autopsy review. The cumulative effect of the medications, combined with Dorothy's pre-existing heart condition, directly contributed to her death. The ME is ruling it homicide. A pause. Marcus's plea deal is off the table. The DA is moving forward with murder charges. Murder. The word felt enormous, final. How long could he get? 25 years to life, Brennan said. And Rebecca? Vanessa just flipped. She's testifying against Marcus in exchange for reduced charges. Says he told her Dorothy wouldn't last much longer anyway, that they were just speeding up the inevitable. She claims she felt pressured and didn't understand how serious it was. But her testimony puts Marcus's intent on record. After we hung up, I sat in Grandma Dorothy's chair for a long time, looking at her garden through the window. She'd planned this garden knowing she wouldn't see another spring, had planted perennials that would bloom long after she was gone. Everything about her final months had been about preparation, about ensuring something beautiful survived even when she couldn't. My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Diane. Patricia called me crying, begging me to help Marcus. She says you could stop this if you wanted to, that you're choosing to destroy the family. I told her the family destroyed itself. Stay strong, honey. Dorothy would be so proud. I typed back, "Thank you. That means everything." Then I called Robert Ashford. "No deals," I said firmly. Marcus made choices for over a year, documented choices to hurt someone who trusted him. He doesn't get to negotiate his way out of consequences now. Understood, Ashford said. For what it's worth, I think Dorothy would approve of that decision. As I locked up Grandma Dorothy's house and drove back to Jasmine's place, I felt something shift inside me. The fear was gone, replaced by cold certainty. Marcus had gambled that he was smarter than an old woman and her schoolteacher granddaughter. He'd lost that bet spectacularly, and now he'd spend the rest of his life understanding exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. The trap Grandma Dorothy had built was closing, and there was no escape. The trial started on a gray morning in March, 5 months after the funeral. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, flanked by Jasmine and Aunt Diane, while Marcus was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. He'd lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by prison-issue clothing, his confidence shattered into something that looked like barely contained panic. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, I didn't look away. I wanted him to see that I wasn't afraid anymore. The prosecution's case was devastating in its precision. They presented Grandma Dorothy's video testimony first, and watching it on the courtroom's large screen was even more powerful than I'd remembered. Dorothy spoke directly to the camera with the authority of someone who knew she was creating history. "I want it understood that I'm of sound mind," she said clearly. "I've taken cognitive tests at 3 separate facilities without my son's knowledge. All showed normal function for my age. What Marcus didn't realize is that I've been pretending the confusion was worse than it was. I wanted to see how far he'd go." The jury, 7 women and 5 men, ranging from their 30s to 70s, watched transfixed. Several took notes furiously. The prosecution attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Catherine Vance, paused the video at crucial moments to highlight details. "Notice the dates Mrs. Whitmore mentions," Vance said. She's citing specific conversations, showing receipts, demonstrating perfect recall. This is not a confused elderly woman. This is someone conducting a meticulous investigation into her own abuse. Gerald Blackwood objected repeatedly, claiming the video was prejudicial, that Dorothy had been coached, that its authenticity couldn't be verified. But the prosecution had technical experts who'd analyzed the footage, confirming it hadn't been edited or manipulated. They had the attorney who'd witnessed Dorothy recording it, testifying that she'd been clear-minded and determined. They had 3 different doctors who'd examined Dorothy in the months before her death, all confirming she'd shown no signs of dementia. Then came the medical evidence. The toxicologist explained how diphenhydramine and lorazepam interact, how the dosages found in Dorothy's system would cause severe drowsiness, confusion, and impaired decision-making. These medications, especially in combination and at these levels, would make someone appear cognitively impaired, she testified. But the impairment is chemical, not neurological. Remove the drugs, and normal function returns. The medical examiner was next, explaining how the prolonged drugging had stressed Dorothy's already weakened heart. Mrs. Whitmore had managed her heart condition successfully for years with proper medication and lifestyle choices. The introduction of these sedatives created a cascade effect: lower blood pressure, irregular heartbeat, reduced oxygen levels. In my professional opinion, the drugging directly contributed to the cardiac event that killed her. I watched Marcus's face throughout this testimony. He sat rigid, his lawyer whispering urgently in his ear, but I could see his hands trembling. This wasn't some abstract legal maneuvering anymore. This was a room full of people methodically proving he'd killed his own mother. The pharmacy records came next, showing how Vanessa had filled prescriptions and refilled them at unusual intervals. The pharmacist testified that he'd questioned the frequency once, and Vanessa had claimed she kept losing the bottles, needed replacements. In retrospect, he said quietly, I should have been more suspicious. But she seemed like a normal suburban mother, not someone diverting medications for illegal purposes. Vanessa herself took the stand on day 3, and the transformation was startling. The polished woman from family gatherings was gone, replaced by someone who looked diminished, wearing minimal makeup and an ill-fitting suit. She wouldn't look at Marcus as she testified. He told me his mother was becoming difficult, Vanessa said, her voice barely above a whisper, that she was getting paranoid and combative, that she needed something to help her relax. He asked me to share my anxiety medication, said it would just be temporary until we could get her to a proper doctor. She twisted her hands in her lap. I didn't know he was using it to incapacitate her. I swear I didn't know. Catherine Vance approached with a document. But you did know, Mrs. Fletcher. We have text messages from you to your husband dated 7 months before Dorothy's death. Would you like me to read them to the court? She didn't wait for an answer. You wrote, how much longer do we have to do this? I feel like we're killing her. And your husband responded, just a few more months. Once the will is changed, we can back off. Does that refresh your memory? Vanessa's face crumpled. I was weak. I was scared of losing Marcus, of our kids losing their father. He convinced me we weren't really hurting her, that we were just making her more manageable. She finally looked at the jury. But I knew. Deep down, I knew it was wrong. I'm so sorry. Her testimony sealed Marcus's fate. No amount of Blackwood's cross-examination could undo the impact of a co-conspirator admitting guilt and implicating the defendant. The jury's expressions shifted from neutral to disgusted as they realized the scope of the conspiracy. My turn to testify came on day 4. Catherine Vance walked me through my relationship with Grandma Dorothy, establishing the pattern of consistent care I'd provided. I described our weekly visits, the recipes we'd cooked together, the conversations we'd had. Then she asked about the changes I'd noticed. She started seeming tired, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath. At first I thought it was just aging, but then I noticed it was always worse on Thursdays, after Marcus's visits. She'd be sharp and engaged on Saturdays when I'd come over, but by the following Thursday, she'd seem foggy again. It wasn't until she gave me the USB drive that I understood why. What did Dorothy tell you when she gave you the drive? Vance asked. She said, Rebecca, I need you to promise me something. When I'm gone, you'll make sure people know the truth. Not for revenge, but so this doesn't happen to someone else's grandmother. I looked directly at the jury. She wasn't angry about what was happening to her. She was furious that Marcus might get away with it and do it to someone else. Blackwood's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint me as the manipulative one, suggesting I'd planted ideas in Dorothy's head about Marcus to secure the inheritance for myself. But I'd prepared for this, and I had answers for everything. "Did you ever suggest to your grandmother that your brother was trying to hurt her?" he demanded. "No, she told me. And then she proved it with documentation I didn't even know existed. Isn't it convenient that Dorothy left everything to you and nothing to her own son?" "It's not convenient, it's tragic," I said, meeting his eyes. "She wanted to leave her estate to her whole family. Marcus made that impossible by proving he valued money more than her life." The most damaging evidence came near the end of the prosecution's case: Marcus's computer search history, recovered by forensic investigators. The searches painted a chilling picture of premeditation. How much medication needed to cause dementia symptoms? Can drugging elderly person be detected in autopsy? How to change will of incompetent parent? Average time for elderly person to die of heart failure. The dates on these searches started 13 months before Dorothy's death, proving this hadn't been a spontaneous decision but a calculated campaign. The jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats as each search was displayed on the courtroom screen. When the prosecution rested, Gerald Blackwood attempted to mount a defense, but there wasn't much he could do. Marcus didn't testify, probably on his lawyer's advice, since he'd have been destroyed on cross-examination. Blackwood called character witnesses who testified about Marcus's reputation in the business community, his charitable work, his role as a father. But it rang hollow against video of Dorothy explaining how her son had drugged her. The closing arguments were passionate. Blackwood claimed the prosecution hadn't proven intent, that Marcus had believed he was helping his mother manage her medications, that the whole situation was a tragic misunderstanding compounded by family dysfunction. "Ask yourselves," he said to the jury, "if you've ever made a mistake with a loved one's care. Does that mistake make you a murderer?" But Catherine Vance demolished that argument in her closing. "This wasn't a mistake," she said forcefully. "Mistakes don't involve a year of internet searches about causing dementia symptoms. Mistakes don't involve drafting fraudulent wills while someone is drugged into compliance. Mistakes don't involve text messages that say, 'How much longer do we have to do this?' because even the accomplice knows they're committing a crime." She gestured toward the evidence table. Dorothy Whitmore knew exactly what was happening to her, and she built an airtight case against her killers because she wanted justice. The question before you isn't whether Marcus Fletcher made a mistake. It's whether you'll honor Dorothy's courage by holding him accountable for murder. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I spent the time in a conference room with Jasmine, Aunt Diane, and Robert Ashford, unable to eat or focus on anything except the clock. When the bailiff finally called us back, my heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with steel gray hair, stood and read the verdict with a steady voice. "On the count of murder in the second degree, we find the defendant Marcus James Fletcher guilty." The courtroom erupted. Marcus's head dropped into his hands. Somewhere behind me, I heard Patricia wailing, but I couldn't turn around to look at her. I kept my eyes forward, watching as the judge thanked the jury and remanded Marcus to custody, pending sentencing. Catherine Vance turned to me as the deputies led Marcus away. "Your grandmother would be proud," she said quietly. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, or triumph, it was completion. Like I'd finished a promise that had been weighing on me for months. Grandma Dorothy had trusted me to see this through. And I had. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, but I'd prepared a statement with Robert Ashford. I stood on the steps with Aunt Diane beside me and read from the paper in my shaking hands. Today, justice was served for Dorothy Whitmore, a brilliant woman who deserved to be protected by the people she loved. Instead, she had to protect herself. And in doing so, she protected countless other vulnerable seniors by showing that elder abuse will not go unpunished. I hope this verdict brings peace to everyone who loved her and serves as a warning to anyone who thinks they can victimize the elderly without consequences. As cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the funeral: lightness. The weight of Grandma Dorothy's case, the burden of truth-telling, the fear of failure, all of it lifted. I'd kept my promise. Marcus would pay for what he'd done, and Grandma Dorothy's final lesson was complete. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent, even when silence would be easier, especially when silence would be easier. Marcus was sentenced 6 weeks later to 25 years to life. Patricia received 5 years for accessory charges and conspiracy to commit fraud, though she'd avoided the murder charges by claiming ignorance of the full scope of Marcus's plan. Vanessa got 3 years and probation. the reward for turning state's evidence. None of them would be eligible for parole for a long time. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing. I'd said everything I needed to say at the trial, and watching them receive their punishment felt less important than moving forward with the life Grandma Dorothy had wanted me to have. Instead, I spent that day closing on a house, a small craftsman bungalow 3 blocks from the school where I taught, with a backyard perfect for the garden I'd been planning. The house had good bones but needed work, which suited me fine. I wanted to build something new, not just inherit something old. Using part of Dorothy's inheritance, I'd enrolled in graduate school to get my master's degree in education, something I'd always postponed because of lack of funds. I'd also started a foundation in Grandma Dorothy's name, providing legal assistance to families dealing with elder abuse cases. The rest of the money sat in careful investments, exactly as Dorothy would have advised. 6 months after the trial, I was planting rose bushes in my new garden when Jasmine came over with wine and takeout. We sat on my back porch as the sun set, watching the neighborhood kids play street hockey. "How are you really doing?" Jasmine asked, studying my face. And don't give me the polite answer. The real one. I considered the question carefully. "I'm okay," I said finally. "Not great, not terrible. Just okay. I miss her every day. Sometimes I'll think of something funny and reach for my phone to text her before I remember she's gone." I paused. "But I'm not angry anymore. And I don't feel guilty about what happened to Marcus and Mom. They earned every consequence they got." "No regrets about exposing them?" Jasmine pressed. "Not even one," I said firmly. "Grandma Dorothy spent her last months fighting for justice, and I'm not going to dishonor that by wishing I'd stayed quiet to preserve some false sense of family unity. They weren't family. Family doesn't poison each other for inheritance money." My phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line made me pause. From the Dorothy Whitmore Foundation. I opened it to find a message from our first client, a woman whose father had been financially exploited by his caretaker. "Thanks to your foundation's legal help, we recovered most of Dad's stolen savings, and the caretaker is facing criminal charges. Dorothy's story gave us courage to fight back. Thank you for turning tragedy into protection for others." I showed Jasmine the email, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "This is what she wanted," I said. Not revenge against Marcus. Not even really justice for herself. She wanted to make sure other families wouldn't go through what we did. That evening, after Jasmine left, I walked through my new house, room by room. The living room where I'd eventually host the dinner parties Dorothy always encouraged me to throw. The spare bedroom that would become my writing space, where I'd finally start that historical fiction novel. The kitchen where I'd already begun recreating her recipes, each one a small act of memory and love. On the mantel, I'd placed 3 things: a framed photo of Grandma Dorothy in her garden, the letter she'd written me, and a small plaque I'd had made with her final words from the video testimony. "The truth is like a weed. It will crack through concrete if you give it time." My phone rang. Aunt Diane calling from Florida. "Hey, sweetheart, just checking in. How's the new house?" "Perfect," I said honestly. "I planted the roses today, the ones like Grandma had in her garden. She'd love that," Diane said warmly. Then more hesitantly, "Patricia called me yesterday, from prison. She wanted me to ask you to come visit her. Said she wants to apologize." I felt a flicker of the old anger, but it passed quickly. "No," I said simply. "I don't need her apology, and she doesn't get my forgiveness. Some bridges burn for good reasons." "That's what I figured," Diane said. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling all this with more grace than most people could. Dorothy always said you were stronger than you knew." After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in Grandma Dorothy's rocking chair, which I'd moved from her house to my porch. The neighborhood was quiet now, streetlights flickering on, families settling in for the evening. This was the life Dorothy had wanted for me. Peaceful, secure, built on my own terms rather than inherited guilt and obligation. I thought about Marcus sitting in a prison cell, about Patricia in a women's correctional facility, about Vanessa trying to rebuild a life after betraying her husband to save herself. Part of me wondered if they understood yet what they'd lost, not just in terms of freedom and money, but in terms of who they'd revealed themselves to be. They'd shown that there was no line they wouldn't cross for money, no person they wouldn't hurt if it benefited them. And Grandma Dorothy had shown the opposite, that there was no evidence she wouldn't gather, no discomfort she wouldn't endure, no elaborate plan she wouldn't execute to protect someone she loved. Her legacy wasn't the money she'd left me, though that had changed my life. Her legacy was the lesson that strength isn't about physical power or financial resources. It's about refusing to accept injustice, even when fighting back is harder than staying silent. My first day back at school after summer break, I arrived early to set up my classroom. On my desk, I placed a new photo frame holding a picture of Grandma Dorothy and me from my college graduation, both of us grinning at the camera. My students would inevitably ask about it, and I decided I would tell them the truth, in age-appropriate terms, that the woman in the photo had taught me the most important lesson of my life. That doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. 3 years later, the foundation had helped 12 families successfully prosecute elder abuse cases. Marcus's conviction had been cited in 2 different state-level policy changes strengthening protections for seniors. Dorothy's story had been featured in a documentary about financial exploitation of the elderly. Her video testimony had been viewed over 2 million times, shared by advocacy groups, and used in training for social workers. I married a fellow teacher I'd met at a conference, someone who understood that my first loyalty would always be to honoring Grandma Dorothy's memory. We bought her old house when it finally sold through the estate, renovating it into a community space where seniors could take art classes and learn about financial literacy and legal protections. The Dorothy Whitmore Center, the sign out front read. On the wall inside, we'd hung blown-up photos of her garden in full bloom. Marcus came up for parole after 15 years. I submitted a victim impact statement opposing it, reminding the board that he'd never expressed genuine remorse, only anger at being caught. His parole was denied. Patricia got out after 4 years for good behavior, but I never saw her. She moved to Arizona, Aunt Diane told me, and lived alone in a small apartment. She'd tried to reach out twice. Letters I returned unopened. I had nothing to say to her. Vanessa served her full sentence and then disappeared from public life. I heard through indirect channels that she'd changed her name, moved to the Midwest, worked some kind of administrative job. Her children, now adults, had apparently severed contact with both parents. The price of betrayal was steeper than she'd probably imagined. And me? I thrived in ways I'd never allowed myself to dream about when I was busy being the good daughter, the understanding sister, the one who kept peace at the expense of truth. I published that novel, dedicating it to Dorothy Whitmore, who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to be silent. I became department chair at my school. I traveled to all the places Grandma Dorothy and I had talked about visiting together, carrying her photo with me to every destination. But the most important thing I did was learn to spot the signs in my students' families, the subtle indicators that someone might be vulnerable to exploitation. I became the teacher who asked careful questions, who noticed when kids mentioned grandparents suddenly changing wills or acting confused. I became the person who connected families with resources before tragedy struck. Grandma Dorothy's fight hadn't just saved me. It had equipped me to help save others. On the 10th anniversary of her death, I stood in her garden at the center, surrounded by students, colleagues, families we'd helped, and board members of the foundation. We'd planted a memorial tree, a Japanese maple that would blaze red every autumn. I spoke briefly about what Dorothy had meant to me, about her courage and her careful planning, about how she'd turned her own victimization into a weapon against all victimizers. She could have stayed quiet, I told the assembled crowd. She could have let Marcus's drugs confuse her, could have signed whatever papers he put in front of her, could have died without anyone knowing the truth. But she chose differently. She chose to fight back with intelligence and documentation and strategic patience. And because she did, 12 other families are safe. Hundreds of seniors have learned to protect themselves. Laws have changed. I looked up at the memorial tree, its branches spreading wide. That's the real inheritance she left. Not money, but the courage to stand up to people who think power gives them the right to harm others. As the ceremony ended and people mingled, drinking lemonade and sharing stories, I felt a profound sense of peace. Marcus was still in prison, would be for years to come. Patricia lived in obscurity and regret. But Grandma Dorothy's name was attached to protection, justice, and love. And I woke up every morning in a house I'd bought with money she left me, pursuing dreams she'd encouraged, living the life she'd fought to secure for me. Not because I'd stayed silent to keep the peace, but because I'd honored her final wish, to tell the truth no matter the cost. Some people might call what happened to Marcus and Patricia revenge. I called it consequences. They'd treated an elderly woman's life as an obstacle to money they wanted. They'd calculated, planned, and executed a scheme to incapacitate and defraud her. And when she'd turned out to be smarter than they'd ever imagined, when she documented every crime and left evidence that couldn't be refuted, they'd faced exactly what they deserved. Grandma Dorothy had taught me many things over the years, how to make a perfect pie crust, how to tend a garden through changing seasons, how to grade papers efficiently. But her final lesson was the most valuable, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let evil win. Even when fighting cost you everything you thought was family, I'd kept that promise, and I'd keep it for the rest of my life, making sure her story lived on as a warning and an inspiration. That's what real family does. They show up, they fight for each other, and they never let the truth stay buried. Marcus had underestimated an 86-year-old woman and her schoolteacher granddaughter. That mistake cost him everything. And if that's revenge, then revenge tastes exactly like justice.